All right. Well, welcome everybody to the Return to Play and Summer Sports Coaches Call. I appreciate your patience with some of this stuff. We had a long kind of lead up knowing that there was going to be some updates to the Return to Play coming from Special Olympics Incorporated, and we wanted to kind of give it a little bit of time to get to us and for us to implement it before we got into a call and met, and that also was a little bit of a delay on why we had rules and some of that stuff that was a little bit slower to come up with, but we'll go over all of that. But first, I want to start off with the Return to Play, and anybody who's been on any of these calls know my favorite thing to do with this is to start off with the map. So I will, since we, yes, here. Since we've kind of updated to a different map, I wanted to make sure everybody knew how to get to the one we were looking for. So if we're on our website and you go to the Return to Play portion of our website, this is the kind of the brief paragraph at the beginning of our Return to Play, but it has the link here for the Washington Post. And so I know this is a little bit less user-friendly than using the Wisconsin Department of Health one. Again, we kind of moved away from that one because of the updates started to lessen up, and actually they keep track of the statistic, but not in the way that we want to take a look at it. So that's why we moved over to the Washington Post. This is the one that's recommended by Special Olympics Incorporated in theirs. And so on the top, there's a lot of information. You can just kind of see things, the national trend for cases. And then it goes through a bunch of different things like testing and deaths related to COVID. There's a couple ways you can look at this. One, there's this drop-down box right here that says the US, and you can scroll it all the way down to Wisconsin. And when you do that, you start to look at the cases it will show you the Wisconsin numbers. It'll show you all the state numbers, but then you go down one more and it'll be cases by county. So you can actually look it up. You can sort this any way you want. You can sort it by alphabetical order if you'd like to, or you can sort it by the average new daily cases per 100,000. And so you can see that number, which if you look at that, our highest case, that number is 24, which is really good, especially compared to the last time we met. And a lot of counties in single digits at this point, which is really good. Otherwise, the other option you can do is you can scroll all the way down to the US map. And you see the US map, you can hover over the state, you can see what our statewide average is, but if you click on our state, it will zoom in and it will show you county by county where our numbers are at. So as you can see right now, these numbers are all really, really low in comparison to where we've been in the past. We were at over 50 for a while where we had to shut down completely with our old protocols. And now we're in our low risk or green category in the majority of our counties in the state. So the hope and I think the projections are that for these next the summer months, I think they're projecting that we're going to be around this. I think the concern is that these numbers will go up again in the fall, but we'll get to that point when we get there. So, but just again, how we got to the map and all of that type of stuff. So I know there's going to be some questions that come with the Return to Play. I wrote some down that I could be able to answer some that I've gotten through email. It's a little bit harder with sharing screen to see chat, so I have a couple of people will be reading through some chat stuff. So if I don't get to that one, I'll try to read through those when we get to the point. But again, if you're on our website, you go into this under the sports tab, go to Return to Play. Hopefully you're all very familiar with that. But in here, you'll find the Return to Play guidelines. They were also emailed out. And a lot of it looks similar, and there's definitely some things that look a little bit different. So first off, these new Return to Play will go into effect for our summer sports, so track, swim, and soccer. And that would start if you guys are starting your practices for those sports. You can go ahead and implement these Return to Play protocols. For our season 4 basketball that we're currently, we're going to have our basketball skills competition this upcoming weekend, and then our 3v3 tournament at UW Oshkosh at the beginning of April. We are still following our previous return to play protocols for a couple of reasons. One is to keep the sports season consistent that we've had. We started it with those guidelines when the basketball season started, and also because the venues that we booked for those competitions were they have us booked there knowing our previous COVID protocols, knowing that there's some of the venues that are stricter than even what our COVID protocols are. We want to be respectful of that. And so that's why we're maintaining our previous return to play. So these ones will go into effect for track, swim, and soccer. So the this chart looks somewhat familiar, but a little bit different. SOI increased the different levels. So there's different protocols for different vaccination levels. So 100%, 80 to 99%, 51 to 79%, and below 50%. So they increased those, which gave a little bit more flexibilities for programs to offer stuff. But also it increased the secondary range here. It used to be 0 to 10 and then 11 to 15. This has now been increased to 11 to 50. And so that makes things a little bit more, as you knew before, 50, we shut down programming. Now there's a lot more wiggle room for doing programming. A lot of that had to do with availability of the vaccine. A lot of that had to do with availability of testing and COVID numbers. And as we just continue to progress through this, the more we know, the more we can adjust and go from there. As I mentioned before, when we sent out the information, we are going to operate under the guidelines unless we know it's higher underneath this 51 to 79% range. And the reason why we're doing that is because the statewide average is in the mid 60s right now. So we're going to go off of the statewide average for the general protocols that we're following. If your local program is practicing and you're at 85% vaccinated participants, 100% for vaccinated for participants, then you can operate underneath those levels for your practices. But for our events, unless we know it's higher, we're going to be operating under this 51 to 79%. And if you don't know where your range is, we're going to operate underneath that range for us right now. So what does that mean? Is 0 to 10, we're in green. Like I said, a majority of the counties in the state are in green, which is great. We love to see that. 11 to 50 is now that greater range that we have that moderate risk, that yellow. And then anything over 50 right now falls into this orange category. One thing you'll notice, there's only one spot in this current protocols where it's right now where they have a required stop participation, and that's under 50% vaccinated, over 100 for that 7-day average. So if we're operating underneath this, we will be, it does minimize the amount of time that we have to stop for practices and competitions. But we also will kind of follow through on what the Wisconsin Department of Health recommends and some of the local guidelines, as far as if the numbers go skyrocketing and they say we need to not have large scale events, then we will follow that. But under our protocols right now, it's basically that we thought we would follow local restrictions for events, some of those types of things. Make sure I don't forget anything on this stuff. Another big part of this is they also removed the contact sport restrictions. Previously, you could do contact sports if we were outside of the moderate risk category. Now they don't have that. We can do contact sports in any risk category too. So again, it makes things a little bit more lenient, and it gives us a little bit more flexibility what we can offer and what our requirements are for offering things. The other thing is it slightly loosens the masking policy. So masks, and I got that question quite a bit too. So if we're practicing for track and swim, if you're in the green category, masks are not required. They're recommended for all participants. In the green, in the moderate risk, it's required for indoor activities, but outdoors it's recommended. And then it would be required for everybody in the significant risk category. So again, everybody is in one of these two right now. And so if you're outdoor for track and soccer, that would mean it would be recommended and not required for time. And anytime when we have a requirement for masks, it would be when you're not doing cardiovascular activities. That has not changed in any of that type. So one of the brand new things, and I think this is one that we got a lot of questions about, is that it was introduced for pre-event testing. So there's going to be two situations where pre-event testing is required. If we are hosting a multi-day state level competition, so if you think about things like the celebration games that we're talking about in July, it's a multi-day competition. We would, if we're in the moderate risk category, if for unvaccinated individuals, they would need to be, they would have to have a negative test within 72 hours of the event. PCR test is a recommended testing, but rapid antigen tests can be used, including at-home tests. And so at-home tests, we were talking about looking for negative tests. Obviously, if you do something through like a Walgreens, which, you know, a lot of those tests, they are free at this point, you'll get an emailed test result. You can show that emailed test result. Otherwise, if you do an at-home test, a photo on a phone would be fine as a proof of negative test. Those photos are date stamped, time stamped. You'll be able to double check when that stuff was taken on some of those things. For so that's the only time in the moderate risk category that we would have a required pre-event testing. For significant risk tests, for significant risk events, we would do single day events. We wouldn't be able to do multi-day events. And so we would require testing for events where people would be traveling outside of their local region and coming together with people from outside their local region, which we set at sectional or state level competition. So a single day bowling tournament, a single day, basketball skills competition. If we are in the significant risk category, again, that's going to be over 50, where we previously would be shut down. That's when we require pre-event testing for all participants. So what that looks like, I guess from this end, and I know this is one of the questions for it, is we will be adding onto those forms for the events, those pre-event screenings, that a negative test, a proof of negative test was seen. And the reason behind that is it should be done prior to traveling to competition. We don't want people to have a situation where they travel to Waukesha in July, and all of a sudden we find that we have a positive test, and all of a sudden we have to figure out how to get somebody home, how to quarantine somebody from the rest of the people that are participating. And so that's why we would need those prior to traveling, and why they would then show it during that pre-screening that we would have for those events. So I got the question in the chat. What about the green level for testing? There's no testing in the low risk category. So again, testing is only required multi-day events in the yellow risk category, or for sectional or state level events in significant. And the question came about too, what does that mean for those working the event, staff, volunteers? And we would handle all of that stuff on our end for the event side of things. So this would just be what you're looking for your local programs. So if you have a head coach that's traveling with the group, if you're traveling with the group, you would check that that there would be a proof of negative test for unvaccinated in the moderate, or for everybody in significant risk. And the other point I was going to make is, if we don't have a proof of vaccination in our system, then we just assume that the participant would be unvaccinated. So that's one of the benefits to submitting a proof of vaccination in those situations. Then that's why we would do that. So the other question that just came up in the chat was, if an athlete is vaccinated and the test is not required, it would not be required on the moderate risk. It would be required in significant risk. That would be for everybody. And again, that's because we're traveling outside. We're traveling to an event where people from across the state are there, and it would be over our threshold that we would previously had for running an event. So what does this also mean for vaccinations? So requirements, it really makes it so the bar is much higher for situations where we would have to require a vaccination. Again, we are only requiring a vaccination in situations where we either had to require the vaccination or not host an event. In the previous protocols, that was contact sports, and then indoor sports. And indoor sports was because of our size restrictions. That size restriction has also been increased to 100 in the significant risk, and there's no size restrictions in lower or moderate risk. And so when we're talking about track, swim, and soccer for the summer sports right now. There's no vaccine requirement for participation in any of those sports. Even for swim, if we get to the significant risk category, we've been planning on ways to reduce the size of events. So that might be a shift situation, kind of like we had done last year. But we would still be able to hold a full swim meet with 100 people at a time. And so that way we would not have a vaccine requirement for those sports. I'm trying to catch up on some of these sports, on these questions. Does the athlete do the at-home test and submit a picture, or does the home test need to be done by the coach? It can be done at home by the athlete family, caregiver, and then they can take a picture, and that picture can be the proof of a negative test. So they do not need to do it on site. We want to do that because I don't want to get to a point where we're going to gather with 20 people into a spot. We're all going to take a COVID test, and also we find out somebody's negative. So now they're all hanging out together. Spectators, that's a great question. In the protocols, we have designated spectator areas at our events. In doing so, they aren't within the COVID return to play guidelines. So spectators show up, they go to a designated spectator area, they're not mingling with athletes and coaches. And then in that case, we wouldn't have to do proof of vaccination or negative test in these situations. If there is a spot, I think about bowling alleys don't really have a really good designated spectator area where they won't mingle. That may be where those restrictions are a little bit tighter because we don't have a designated spectator area. So that's kind of the way that would work out. And that's a great question. Are we allowed to pay for tests use it for the athletes in the agency? You can use local program funds to purchase these. You can also use the COVID grant money that we have to purchase tests for athletes. That's all allowable within what's allowable within purchasing using your local program funds. So yeah, that is definitely allowed to do in these situations. So just to touch base again of vaccinations, there's no requirements for participating in sports. The benefit to submitting them is that in the moderate risk, you would not need to be pre-tested in the case where others would. And the definition for fully vaccinated is still the initial doses. So if you did the Johnson & Johnson, it's a single dose. If you did the Moderna or the Pfizer, it's the 2 doses. Right now, boosters are not included in the return to play as a requirement when it comes to fully vaccinated. All right, I'll stop sharing that screen. But I will say too, if you just go through, a lot of the stuff has not changed a ton. A lot of the stuff, like I said, has kind of loosened up based on these numbers. But please make sure that you're familiar with these protocols. Again, and the other, I guess I'll say the other big change too is when it comes to our events, because of the fact that testing could come into play, we are now determining the risk level on Monday prior to the event, rather than Wednesday, to give programs some time to plan to get for testing and all that type of stuff if it were to become a requirement at any of the events. So I know it's a lot of information. I know it's presented in a 5-6 pages of a lot of stuff to go through, a lot of things to understand. And that's why I wanted to, take some time to go over some of the key changes that are part of that. And I know there's some of those questions that are coming through. Is there any other questions that people have before we kind of move into some of the summer sports on return to play?
Yes, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
About the COVID stuff, about the vaccine and stuff. Now you're going to talk about, I know you probably haven't mentioned this yet, about the sports being in one place this year. Are they going to be doing, is it going to affect team sports if COVID numbers, and I was watching the countries and stuff like that, like China and Hong Kong cases where cases have kind of gone up a little bit. Now, if this becomes an endemic, which a lot of people think it will, like say if it's not a pandemic anymore, will these rules still be put into play or will they change?
No, and I appreciate that question. So as we kind of seen as we've gone through this, we get updates from SOI. So actually when they presented this, the guy, one of the public health officials that they worked with for the SOI policies was also working with NFL, MLB. And so they're creating the policies based on the current situation. And so they're willing to adapt. Obviously, the difference between the ones now and what they released in 2020 are very different. And so we're going to continue to adapt those. And then when we get to a point where the protocols aren't seen as needed and for large scale events and what we're doing with Special Olympics, then we'll go back to without having those protocols. But at this point, we follow what we get guidance we get from SOI, and we implement that for the state. And so we will continue to do that. This time around, I think by the time we got the SOI guidelines to when we sent it out to everybody, it was about a week or so. So we're turning around as fast as we possibly can to make sure that we're on the most current for those protocols too. Ron asked about temperatures at practice. We are not requiring temperatures for screening anymore. That's no longer a requirement. So don't have to worry about that. Any other questions on that? Like I said, I know there's a lot, and I know that if you have any other stuff too, you can feel free to follow up after the meeting as well. All right, and we certainly will have some time to answer some questions at the end too. As always too, if you have any questions as we're going through these things, the COVID at Special Olympics Wisconsin email address is a great one to reach out to. There's a few of us that monitor that. We've been trying to get back to people, as soon as we can, probably, within a day or so, with getting some of those type of stuff. So thanks, Brittany, for typing that one in there. All right, so medical deadlines. Medical deadlines for track, swim, and soccer is April 1st. So it'll be coming up for those participating in track, swim, and soccer. So I'll make a note on this. An athlete will need their medical to be good through the district competition for track and swim. Their medical would have to be submitted by April 1st. So if it's not valid through the regional district competition date, state soccer is just the one competition. So obviously it would have to be valid through that May 14th date. If an athlete's medical expires after that regional district date, but prior to the July events, they would be able to submit their medical for the outdoor sports medical deadline, which is June 1st. So there is a little bit of flexibility there that if you say somebody's medical expires at the end of May, they can still compete in districts. And then if they get their medical in by June 1st, they would also be able to advance to state in that situation. Typically, we don't have that secondary one, but because that sports season is so long, we're going to follow it for both of for that sports season there. All right, and then we'll get into some of our sports. So again, I appreciate everybody being patient with us getting our rules and our schedules and all that stuff updated on the website. We got those up today. There's a slight edit on there. I believe it says the wrong location for state track. That's going to be at Carroll University as part of the celebration games. But all those rules are up on the website. We are running our track meets and our swim meets and our soccer competition as they were in 2019 prior to the COVID restrictions. And so the track meet will be in the same format that we used to run. It won't be in shifts like we did last year. Last year was great from a time management standpoint, but it was also difficult because we had to cut a lot of events that I know people that cared about. I know we had a bunch that did longer distances or had done shot put, and so we are offering the full array of events that we have for that, including relays. And so track will be in that format. Again, if you have any questions on schedules for your local competition, you want to reach out to your athletic directors. They'll be able to share what they have at this point for those. But it should be very familiar for those who participated in track previous to that. Again, for swim, we will be running the full array of events for swim as well. Again, that will go from include relays. It will include the developmental events. We do have it worked out that in the case where COVID numbers get too high and we have to run if the cases get too high and we have to run an indoor event with 100 or less people, we're able to schedule out our swim meets to make that happen. So we will still run a full swim meet. We would just run 2 shifts, smaller shifts of those at our district or state levels. And then again, soccer this year, we are doing just a state competition at Muskego High School. Part of that just had to do with the numbers of soccer teams that we had, even a little bit even prior to COVID, but also the anticipation that we probably won't get to too much greater than 30 if we get to that point. So we're going to do a 1 state soccer competition. It makes it better for divisioning, and then we'll be able to do. They won't have the long season that we have for track and swim, and that also allows those athletes to do soccer and then know they can participate in an outdoor sport without a conflict at the celebration games for that type of stuff. Mike had asked, are we offering long running events? We are offering every event that we had prior to 2019, so that would include long running events. Swim events will be Debbie's asked about 2 relay and 2 individual events per swimmer. I believe that's correct, right, Nicole? I think we talked, or Amber and I talked about that today too. 2 and 2, correct? All right. Nicole, I don't know if you can create the quick poll. I forgot to do that prior to this. She might be working on that. One of the questions I wanted to ask coaches, and this is going to be specifically for those who have swim and track relays, with this season being a little bit different, it was suggested that we looked at maybe the way we advance our relays for this year. And so one of the suggestions was we typically would advance relays if they participated in the district event and they all 4 athletes or 5, or 4 of the 5 you have an alternate advanced to state, then you could advance that relay. With the choice having to be happen between track and swim and some of the outdoor sports, it was asked if we would maybe consider doing it where you figure out what athletes you have advanced, and then you can recreate your relay teams when it gets to the state level competition. If it's a newly formed relay team, you would need to submit a qualifying score. We do realize that could potentially bring up where you somebody would submit a qualifying score that may be a little bit, that would be different than what you would get from a competition side of things, and we would just enforce we would enforce that if somebody's time was drastically different, then we could DQ a team if we found it was unsportsmanlike. So we were going to do a quick poll for those who have relays, if what the group's consensus was: should we advance relays, continue to advance relays for this year the traditional way, or allow teams to kind of create relay teams at the state level once we get there. So
I'm not sure how to add a poll in meeting, but I'm just going to send a Google form that will be set up to be anonymous in the chat. So look for that here in a second. And I believe the intent was, yeah, obviously if an athlete on a relay chooses to participate in an outdoor sport, and then that relay can no longer compete if they don't have an alternate. So keep an eye out for that coming in the chat here in a second.
All right. Perfect. And we'll send a Google, we'll send that out with the follow-up email as well, right? I would believe. Yep. So spectators for track meets, mingling spectators. So we at our events within the COVID protocols, what we would do. So since a lot of the track meets have bleacher areas that are designated for spectators, and then I also know for some of our field events, if they're not in the track arena, we would have a fencing or something like that. Spectators would just be asked to stay in those designated spectator areas when they're on site. And so we would like to, granted, it's not going to be a perfect system of saying, hey, you're a spectator, you need to get back in a certain area. This is where we would be looking for and asking coaches to help us with that, but just knowing that it's going to be stated that spectators should be in those designated spectator areas. And if we do find an issue where it's going to be, obviously it differs, when we get to a significant risk category, it becomes a much bigger deal compared to a low risk category. But if we do find those issues, then we can adapt our spectator policies if we need to. So it's just going to be helping us encourage those to stay in designated spectator areas if that's what they're there for. And also, then it does, remind people that that does prevent us from having to do, we get to a moderate or a high or significant risk category where we're going to have to check for proof of vaccination, testing, and all that type of stuff. So it does make it a little bit easier for spectators if they are able to follow those protocols on some of those type of things. So I understand that does add a little bit of, it's a little bit of an inconvenience for that, but that's kind of the way that the protocols are set up in order for us to not have to do the large scale testing or large scale proof of vaccinations. All right. One of the questions that got brought up, and I'll turn it over to Brittany to kind of share a little bit of some information, was I know there's some of those coaches who are starting or have started track and swim practices, and had asked, well, we have competition in April and May, and then we have our next competition in July. So kind of what do we do to kind of go in between those two, that longer sports season? Some of the things I had mentioned, I do know that there's going to be some programs that will do district competition and take a break and then come back to training as we get closer to those games. We also understand there's going to be athletes who are multi-sport athletes who are going to participate in track and swim. They may also participate in softball and bocce or tennis. So they can train with those teams as the outdoor sports side of things, and they can train with the summer game sports. And then obviously when they get closer to the state, they would go back to the training for those specific sport. But also this would be a good time to incorporate some fitness aspects of some things. So Brittany was going to share a little bit more on that.
Yeah, so just a couple of different ideas, especially for those that are doing track or swim and then not doing an outdoor sport. This would be a great opportunity to incorporate SOFIT into your agency or local program, I should say. So if you haven't heard of SOFIT, it's basically using fitness like a sport. So you're still getting together once a week, but instead of doing your traditional sport practice, you're doing some form of physical activity. It could be anything from just making it a walking club. If you wanted to take on a little bit more and do Zumba or yoga or something different, that's always an option. We also have some different tools for you guys to use if you're kind of at a loss for what to do. That includes the Fit5. That's more of a guidance on different physical activity that you can do, and as well as nutrition and hydration. We also have some fitness kits that could be used to go along with SOFIT. It comes with a little bit of equipment. It's not a lot, but it's a backpack full of little travel cones and ladders and very easy things to incorporate into your fitness routine. And it also comes with cards and instructions on how to use that equipment, so you're not just on your own. But this could be just a great time to incorporate fitness, not only right alongside your sports season, but just to fill that gap if you're not sure what to do between the regional event and the state event. And if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to get on the phone or Zoom or anything and talk about it.
Thank you, Brittany. Any questions that we have regards to the summer sports, that to track, swim, and soccer for how they'll be operating this year? We'll get to some questions when it comes to advancement. We'll get to those in a little bit as we talk celebration games, but I just those rules.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question. My
Actually,
coach,
Peter, if you don't mind, we're gonna hold your questions till the end. I see that
I just don't know how to type it on there because I don't have the thing. Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
That's fine.
All right, Lou, I see your hands up.
I got a question. Now we get into summer and it's a busy time. So I'm going to lose a lot of my volunteers and athletes have things going on and try to bring them back. I mean, we have a hard time bringing them back for the 4th of July parade, let alone, their vacation and stuff like that. So I'm concerned about that.
Yep, and I completely understand that piece of it. just kind of a reminder as we get into the celebration games for these sports combined for this one, it's a unique situation for this year. It's a 1-year deal. This is not something that we're planning on continuing to do kind of moving forward. Like I said, there's, I think we mentioned in the schedule memo that part of that was, part of it is that we have a great opportunity to celebrate our 50th anniversary as part of some of this stuff and make these games a larger games. But we also the 2 weekends that we're at USA Games are the 2 weekends that we typically have available for on-campus things for states. I do understand that that's a huge, that does cause some problems when it comes to keeping people involved and activated and doing some of those type of things. And I'll get into that a little bit too when we talk about advancement and some of those type of things. There'll be a lot of information that you'll know ahead of time, so people will know far enough in advance that they advance to state and they can make some of those decisions as far as that goes. And just knowing that training might look a little bit different over the summer compared to what a normal track season would look like. And it's part of those. I understand that's part of the growing pains with just this year and this type of event.
I just want to make it a fun event to keep them involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
Okay,
and
thank
like I
you.
said, as we continue to go through some of those things, we'll want to share some best practices that we hear from coaches that are making, are able to find some creative ways to keep people involved as well. So,
Okay.
Debbie, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, so, Team Wisconsin Swimming had 8 weeks off because of COVID, and we encouraged those 8 swimmers to do the SoFit, follow the planner. If they couldn't get in the water, walk. And we just had practice on Sunday and they are all still dropping time. So it works. Just because they aren't necessarily able to practice in their key sport and at that discipline doesn't mean they can't still achieve a fitness level and still achieve that, that peak performance that you're looking for from them, maintain their fitness or whatever. So the trick is that they have to do it. They have to, and you have to have people who are willing to encourage them to stick with it, which is, what your role is as an local program manager or a coach. But yeah, it does work. We saw it this weekend.
Thanks, Debbie, for sharing that. That's great. All right, I'll get into that because I know we'll have some more questions about some of that type of break when it comes to celebration games. So like I mentioned, so this year, we're unfortunately not going to be having a big state games in June. But again, that's part of it is we're going to be able to get together in July. It's the last weekend of July at Carroll University for what we're calling our celebration games. It's going to be a large event that we'll be able to combine the 3 sports that we typically have at our outdoor sports tournament with softball, bocce, and tennis, as well as track and swimming. And so it's going to be a large game. We're hoping that, that would bring out a lot of athletes to be able to participate with some of the fun stuff. That would be a little bit of a unique experience with it being our 50th anniversary. And also, like, the other part of that is that we have our USA Games. We're bringing almost 100 people out to Orlando for 6 different sports. And that, that's a big undertaking on our staff side of things to be able to do. And it also just happens to go over the 2 weekends that we typically have on universities before camp starts. And so we're doing that. So we're doing a celebration games. The plan is that there will be competitions on both Saturday and Sunday for most sports. So very similar to how our summer game schedule would work out previously, where competition would take place in the majority of the day. So we're looking like 8:30 to 3:30, 4 o'clock on Saturday. And then it would take, a half to 2/3 of a day on Sunday. The idea for some sports, depending on what the schedules would look like, would be able to get out at around noon, and some might be 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. So we for sure we'll be able to release somewhat what those schedules will look like as we continue to figure those things out. I will say the plan for tennis and in that situation we'll talk about it in our outdoor sports call too. But we will be offering both tennis and tennis skills this year as well. So one day will be the traditional tennis play, and one day will be tennis skills, and we'll be able to do that. We'll be doing, like I said, most sports are competing on both days for that. And we'll be doing an opening ceremony on, I believe, Friday night, and then Saturday there'll be another fun activity that's being worked on and we'll continue to send out information as things get finalized. We're actually going through and doing a formal walkthrough tomorrow, and so we'll be able to get a lot more information of what we can be able to, what's going to be where, and what time things are going to take place, and all of that as we continue to go with that. So we will continue to send some of those things out. Before we get to talking about advancement and what that will look like, I also wanted to I'll bring Brittany back in to talk about healthy athletes that we'll be offering at the Celebration Games as well.
Yeah, so Missy asked me to share what we're doing at Celebration Games. So we will be having 4 different disciplines, 2 on each day. So we will have opening eyes and special smiles on Saturday. Opening eyes will be appointment only. We anticipate this one being a very popular discipline. And so for that reason, and the fact that there's just going to be so many athletes at this event, we are making it by appointment. So more information on the specifics of that to come from Missy in the future, but just wanted to put that out there. And then on Sunday, there will be Fit Feet and health promotions. This will be located, we'll kind of get into this a little bit later as we, when we do the outdoor coaches meeting, but the location of Healthy Athletes will be different than in years past. So we are at a different hall that's never been used before. It's called Hasted Hall, if I'm pronouncing that right. It's located pretty much right in the middle between the stadium and the campus center, which is where dining usually is. So it'll definitely be in your walking path as you're walking around campus. So hopefully it'll be easy to swing by and get your athletes through.
Perfect. Carol had asked, will there be T-ball competition? T-ball will be held the same way it has been in previous years. We'll be at the Region 8 softball competition will be the state T-ball competition will be held there. Janet Bell asked if moving this to Carol, does that apply to funds with the extra mileage? So it would be for those who, you know, if you're traveling the extra mileage, that would typically be going to summer games at Stevens Point and now going to Carroll. If that meets that requirement, then you would be able to get the additional grant for that in that case. So yeah, that would be what those would apply for in that situation. So when it comes to these games advancement, I know it's a little bit tricky with having two sports seasons combined, and like I said, having competitions on both days. And so what I will tell you, so athletes can compete at the regional and district level for swim or track in the summer season, and then they can also would be able to participate in bocce, softball, t-ball, tennis. So where it gets complicated, is the fact that there'll be athletes who obviously participate in both. There will be a choice that needs to be made for the state level competition. Are they competing in a summer sport, in their summer sport, track or swim, or are they participating in their outdoor sport, softball, bocce, or tennis? What I will tell you is for athletes or for programs participating in track and swim, you will get your quota the same timeline that you would normally get your quota. Right after your district competition, you will have your quota, you would know your places, you will know which athletes advance on to the state competition or qualify to advance to the state competition. So you can make some decisions for that outdoor sports season, knowing which athletes have already pre-qualified for the state level competition. I will also tell you that if you have, let's say you say, I have 6 track quota spots, I have these 6 athletes dedicated to those, but these 2 athletes play softball, you can make a decision to say, I will fill those 2 quota spots of that softball team advance with 2 other athletes, because you would need to make that decision at the time you register for the state games. So it does give a lot of opportunity for you to know ahead of time, these are the ones that advanced, here's kind of my backup in case softball goes, or you can say, hey, we have a softball team with 13. One of those athletes have already advanced for track. They're planning on participating in track. So I know that softball team will be down to 12 when we get to state. So I know it's not ideal where we want people to be able to participate in state in all the, all the sports that they potentially qualify in, but there'll be a lot of information, and those athletes even going into their district competitions for bocce, softball, that they would know if they've qualified. And if you have a tennis athlete that participates in track or swim and they know they didn't qualify, or they prefer to go in tennis, that spot would open up for them to participate in a swim or track meet, or the swim or track spot would open up for the state meet if they would choose to go to tennis. So it, like I said, I know it's a little bit different than most years, but we'll kind of we'll give you as much information ahead of time for you to be able to make some of those decisions. Steve asked, how will that affect divisioning? That's another thing that kind of come into play with those things. So obviously, individual sports, divisioning doesn't get affected too much because obviously we have those qualifying scores from competitions. When it comes to bocce and softball, we would have to use the information that we have provided for us to know that if a softball team is advancing and they're in Division I, and that in the district competition, regardless of who's, it's kind of the same way too. If we know that there's somebody who could participate at a district level, and then they have a family wedding the day of state, we can't really adjust the divisioning for that. So we would treat that the same way. So that's something to kind of be knowledgeable of when you're kind of constructing those teams as well, is that they will be divisioned at the level that we see them at the district competition for bocce and for softball. Is there any other questions for when it comes to that? And I know somebody had asked about for coaches. We would have, I think I had asked about coaches for track and for bocce. They would be happening at the same time at the Celebration Games. They would be happening on, there would be, or at least I would say there's at least going to be some overlap between those two sports. And I think, sorry, Janet, I'll get back to you. It's for your question about for 100 miles. I'll follow up with Mark, but I believe it is if it is the distance from, if your travel increased 100 miles, I think it's one way, it's not round trip, but I'll double check with Mark to get clarification on that. Any questions about Celebration Games? Yeah, one question about housing. So we will have some on-campus housing as part of that, and we do have a requirement. There will be a distance requirement just because the amount of housing that we have available that you have to be a certain distance away to be able to use that. So sorry for those who are in Region 8, you won't be an option to house on campus, but we'll also be trying to find some hotels that will have some deals for people too. Jake, did you have a question? Oh, you have to unmute.
For
Go ahead, Jake.
Celebration Games.
For Celebration Games,
athletes do both sports the same season?
what was that for this? It's gonna be just like every other year. So you would choose one outdoor sport, and one you can choose between softball, bocce, and tennis for that.
And then track and
But
swimming? Can we
track
do track
is-
and softball at the same time?
You can do
Right.
track and softball, but at the state games, you would have to go for one sport. It's kind of similar to for USA games where you can get nominated for multiple sports, but you make a decision by the time you get to camp. It's very, it's that same thing. So in the district level, you can do track and you can do softball, but when you get to state, if you qualify for both, you can they'll be competing at the same time. You can't be at two places in once.
Oh, that's good. Most colleges don't like that.
Like I said, I understand it puts a strain on this year, and I completely understand that. Carol did ask if since T-ball is separate from state, can an athlete compete in T-ball and state Celebration Games? That would be a yes. So they would have to choose between. So in those 5 sports that are happening, so obviously T-ball would be that outdoor sports one that they have chosen. Just the same way that soccer, if you choose soccer in the summer game season, you could then you could do state soccer and you can do the celebration games in an outdoor sport. So yeah, you can do T-ball for your outdoor sport, and then you can go to the celebration games, swim or track. And similar as we talk about that, golf is separate. You don't have to choose between golf and one of those games. It's just the ones that we have overlapping competition. Those 5 sports that we have during that state games, we would have to make a decision on.
Hey, Jason, I got a question.
Sure.
Like, say you only take okay, we're probably going to have track and swimming and bocce and everything at state and softball. But if the softball team which they only play on Saturdays, do they have to go, you got those separate plans, you got to take either A, B, or C? Now, can softball just go on with their separate plan instead of going with the rest to spend the whole weekend there?
The plan for softball is that competition will be both days. So the softball schedule, so that way, rather than playing a 2-game schedule, you may play a 3-game a full round robin schedule or something like that. So there would be competition on both days.
Okay.
Yeah, but we would do offer that. I mean, in a situation like that, for those kind of, if we have one day of tennis match play, we do offer programs to split their delegation of doing, hey, we're doing one that's staying on campus all weekend and one that's just coming up for the day. We do have that option, similar to what we had in the past.
Okay, because I know this year we're planning on having our tournament on Father's Day weekend like we have been in the past, except for the last 2 years. So that's going to include maybe all of area 4 and 5's teams.
So I got a question. I
Okay.
got a question for you.
No, hold on. Yeah, no, that should be fine. Like I said, if you do that, so that invitational, that Father's Day weekend, that should qualify for that district tournament. That should not be a problem. So, but then we talk about the reason why we would do 2 days of competition is at state would be that we allowed for teams to get another game in, and we'd also maybe allow for all our teams to be at the same venue. So.
Okay, so the agency has to take the same venue. I mean, the same plan. You can't split it up.
What do you know when you go out to the games, like if you had athletes that participate in, like if you're, like I said, probably the best example would be if you have a tennis athlete that's only can compete on, let's say, Saturday, and you have softball athletes that are going to compete on Saturday and Sunday, you can split your delegation.
No, okay.
Yep.
All right.
One thing I was gonna.
All right. Do we have any other questions?
Yes, I have a question for you. One
All right,
last
go ahead,
question.
Peter.
The swimming, is the swimming the same day as track? Like, what day is it gonna fall on? Because if somebody wanted to go to a thing, like they wanted to go to swimming for the day, is that on a Thursday or Friday? Do you know?
For the celebration games,
Yeah.
the plan would be that they would swim on both Saturday and Sunday.
Oh, the same time as softball, so you can only do one or the other.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, now is that gonna be just this year only, or is that gonna?
Yep.
So we're gonna be back in point or something like that, or whatever?
The plan that for these 5 sports being combined is the plan for this year. Like I said,
Because of the global games, because of
Yep.
the USA games.
partially that, and partially that we can have a bigger celebration for their 50th anniversary.
Sure.
Too. Yep.
Here, all right. Thank you.
Oh, yep. So sorry. And then the question that came up too, appreciate that. It was on my notes. Athletes and coaches need to, so you do not need to the COVID paperwork, the participation, the COVID-19 participation form, and the communicable disease waiver. You do not need to resubmit those forms once they've been submitted. If they've been submitted once, you're good for now. We haven't been told that you need to resubmit those. For new athletes coming back, haven't participated, they do need to submit those forms. Those forms have not gone away with the new protocols, but you only need to submit them once. So if you have somebody who hasn't participated in a while, we would if you haven't participated in a while, they would need to get those forms in. Again, those are all participants, so that includes athletes, coaches, volunteers that would have at your practice or traveling to these events. You would need to have the communicable disease waiver and the participation form in. But if you turned it in the first competition we had coming back, you're good to go for those. And so we will kind of remind those as we do registrations. If we know anybody is missing any of those, we'll continue to do that. So yeah, and we're still developing schedules, and we'll take a look at that. So bocce and some of those ones, we'll get a little bit more clear stuff once we kind of get to the venue and get an idea of what we have and what we have going on. Sharon, yes, correct. If an athlete is doing T-ball, they would be able to do track at the Celebration Games since they're not both at Carroll. That's correct. Yes. So Debbie, so anybody, so it's caregivers. So I'll rephrase that. So the way we describe participant is anybody who's actively involved in an activity. So this is kind of at your practices. Do you have a designated area where parents hang out during practice? They're not involved with the drills or whatever's going on during practice. If they just show up, drop off, and they hang out and watch, they would not need a communicable disease waiver on file. If they are part of practice, if they're mingling within practice and all that type of stuff, it's safer to have those forms on file. But again, the big thing is that we double check for athletes, coaches, volunteers at your practice have the communicable disease waiver and the participation form. And that, do athletes need to choose before softball district competition? So that's going to be it's going to be whatever is going to work out best for your program. So they do not need to choose for that. So like I talked about a situation where you have 6 track quota spots, and 2 of those track athletes are on your softball team. You can have a conversation with those athletes to say you can play softball if your softball team advances. You know, we'd want you to advance with your softball team, or we would want to know which way you would lean so we could fill your spots for track. So they don't need to choose before softball, but just know that if you have somebody who qualifies for track that's on your softball team and they choose to do track, then you're not able to replace that athlete at the state game. So if you have 12 people on your roster, now you're down to 11, or so either you need to know that you have enough people to cover those spots for people who potentially be in other games, or it's a good conversation to have with those athletes to say, you've already qualified for track, you're participating in softball. If you choose to participate in softball, are you going to go to state in softball or track? Like, you can have that conversation with them so you can better plan. But you would know who qualifies prior to softball season for those summer sports, the track and swim.
Yeah, Jason, in regards to the next question, I have 5 athletes that go out for track, and they're all on the softball team. They all decided not to even compete for track because every year they qualify for state anyway for track. So if they were to compete in track and they qualified for state and they gave up their slots and decided to play softball, we would have 5 extra slots.
Right, because your quota spots are based on the participation. So you'd be able to use those slots. You say, hey, these 5 slots were not being used because they're choosing to go in a different sport. So then you would be able to qualify the next 5 on your list. Yes. Yep.
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks.
Yep. So it won't hurt an athlete who says, I want to participate in softball, but I also like to do track for the regional meet. So you give them an opportunity to still participate in both those sports. All right. What we'll do is we'll stick around for some questions afterwards. I know we're at 8 o'clock, so I want to make sure I respect everybody's time tonight. So thank you again for everybody who jumped on, and again, I know there's a lot of stuff. It gets complex at times, and I appreciate your patience and your understanding as you continue to review and go through the updates as we do. If you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out to the COVID email covid@specialolympicswisconsin.org. Reach out to myself, reach out to your athletic directors. We'll do our best to answer those questions. And if we don't know the answers right away, we'll let you know. We'll get those answers for you sooner than later. So Again, thank you everybody for your time, and we look forward to seeing everybody out at competitions here soon. Bye, everybody, and then we'll stick around for some questions.